Okay. Well, thanks for joining in. I'm happy it was quite a lot of people who have tuned in. As I've seen, there seem to be quite a lot of people who are from Glasgow or at least Scotland. So I don't need to introduce that much. I think I have given presentations and readings previously at places where not many people really knew about the city or had been to Scotland. So I'm just gonna start with the book. It's named The Tree That Never Grew. I wrote it in German, but I'm currently translating it as well. I have translated some chapters. It is a short book, but yes, so I'm still working on that. This is what it looks like. You will see it a bit better in the presentation that I'm going to start in a second. Well, it's named The Tree That Never Grew because of the Glasgow coat of arms, which, as many of you might know, goes there's the tree that never grew, there's the bird that never flew, there's the fish that never swam, and there's the bell that never rang. I was always fascinated by it because it encompasses, in a way, it seems like a strange sort of a slogan for a city because it sounds like it stayed behind the expectations, but I always also felt it quite touching and moving. So that definitely inspired me. The story of the book essentially starts in 1853 during the height of the Highland clearances in Knoydart, which is a peninsula near the Isle of Skye. It's uninhabited nowadays. There's only a remote pub left there, but there used to be a few crofts where people did small substance farming, but they were evicted from their land during these times because the landlords thought it would be more profitable to have sheep there instead of the people. So many people came to Glasgow as a result of that. And because of a lot of people who were expelled from the Highlands and also who fled the famine in Ireland at the time, Glasgow grew quite a lot. And this is essentially where the first two chapters start. I am going to try and start the presentation. I hope that it does work. Yes. So does everyone see that?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yes. See it.
So this is what it looks nowadays in Knoydart, but there used to be a village called Invery. And this is where the first two chapters take place. Just give me a second. Yeah, I'm sorry for that. I have to find the story. I had the website open and now it has closed, so I just need to reopen it. There it is. So it's set in 1853 in this little village of Inverie that I was just talking about. And it's called the Silent Valley. Josephine MacDonald's men came at night after the ship had left. The valley was quieter than usual, deprived of 330 of its inhabitants. The laird's widow had given them an ultimatum: stay and become dispossessed, or leave for Canada aboard the Sillery. Most had chosen to leave. Catriona Dougal and her family had stayed, not because they believed in a future as crofters on land that barely provided enough to sustain them, but because of Rory. He had been born prematurely on a stormy winter's evening, when the icy wind had forced its way through every crack in the croft's unmortared stone, and the fire in the hearth had struggled to hold its ground. He weighed barely more than a kitten when he first opened his eyes on the lamb's wool pelt. When the midwife lifted him and his eyes met his mother's face, pale and worn out with exhaustion, Catriona thought him dead. It wasn't until the midwife, an old woman who lived half a day's journey away, gave him a slap on the backside that he opened his eyes and cried out. Later, he began to cough and barely ate. Catriona's breasts held little milk. The potatoes that Seamus, his parents, and she had planted had rotted in the earth, and the land yielded little else. Some of the men took to the sea to fish, others tended small flocks of sheep. But it would never be enough to sustain them, and so most families accepted Josephine MacDonald's offer, enduring weeks crammed into the dark, stifling holds of ships with foul food and tainted water. Such a crossing would have been the death of Rory. And so the Dougals remained in Inverie, one of the last families still clinging to the edge of the old world. They were stirred awake by the dog's incessant barking. Loud voices, English commands carried away by the wind. The brittle wood of the door splintering under the force of heavy boots, the torches bathing the black night sky in a ghostly glow. Catriona grabbed the quilt, instinctively wrapping it around Rory to shield him from the battering rain and the unforgiving wind. Dressed in nothing but her nightgown, she ran into the dark. The croft's thatched roof lit up in flames. The fire tore through table and bed, through the sheepskin before the hearth, where she had borne Rory, through the pages of her grandmother's Gaelic Bible. It scorched the grey stones from which the walls and floors had been hewn. The child cried. Catriona pressed him against her breast, pleading with him to be quiet, while she fled blindly into the night. She heard the crackling of burning wood, Seamus coughing up clumps of ash as he burst from the house, trying to save what little they had left. But there was nothing left to save. When they emerged from their hiding place by the river bank the next morning, the rain had extinguished the flames. The fire had left behind nothing but the charred remains of the last inhabited houses of Inverie. The pigs lay dead in their ruins of their sty, the potato patch was covered in soot, and the dogs had fled. The valley lay silent. So, as I've just said, a lot of the inhabitants of this place fled to Glasgow, and the city grew quite exponentially in size. It happened to be one of the biggest cities in Europe at the time, and lots of small and cramped living quarters were established, such as the Gorbals, which can be seen in one of these old archive pictures. They often saw up to 10 people sharing 1 or 2 bedroom houses in these old tenements. And this is also where the family from the book finds themselves. They're struggling to navigate the city life, which is quite a large contrast between that and the silence and the emptiness of the highlands. And it was also a time, besides the growth, it was also a large time of transformation for Glasgow itself, because industrialization was in full force. There was lots of shipbuildings, so there were jobs. There was also lots of construction going on with the central station being built and an entire quarter of the city being torn down, basically razed to the ground. It used to be a theatre district with lots of entertainment, pubs, even churches. That was all torn down and is now, there's still remnants of it to be seen under Central Station in Glasgow. This place was called Grahamstown. And shortly afterwards, they built the subway, which was one of the third oldest in the world. So that does give an idea of how quickly both the life of the people and the city transformed itself. So my next chapter does take place a few years later, is in the late 1800s. And it does feature the subway. This is not an original photo. This is from a museum, but that's what it looked like back in the day. (1896). Paul hated the subway. His small fingers gripped the bars of the sticky wooden bench as the train shugled through the tunnel. He shut his eyes to avoid looking into the dark, narrow tube that passed just millimeters from the train's scissor gate doors, the same tunnel his father had died in. After giving up life at sea, John had taken a job in construction. Building Glasgow's underground had been grueling work. While digging the tunnel meant to run beneath the Clyde at the far end of Jamaica Street, the river had burst through the walls. Most of the men had made it out alive. His father hadn't. He probably even tried to save the others. He'd been that kind of man, no matter how hard Paul's mom tried to convince him otherwise. Strictly speaking, his death had been her fault. If she hadn't always been sick or busy tending the younger ones, his dad could have stayed on the ship. Instead, he drowned in the middle of the city. Since then, the tunnel brought on palpitations and shortness of breath. Not that anyone could know, of course. Not Marcus, his younger brother, and certainly not Billy Curran and the other Orange boys from Bridgeton who gave him trouble at the park. Billy and his lot claimed the green as theirs. As soon as Paul and his mates came near from the Gorbal side, they attacked. Sticks, stones, and slurs. Nothing was beneath them. They called them Fenians, hurled insults about his Creole mother, but the worst were the cheers about his father. A sailor so useless, they said, he drowned before he even got to the harbour. Since then, Paul carried a tight, unspoken fury and a taste for revenge, not just against Billy Curran, but also his mom, who knew exactly how much he hated the subway. Maybe that was why she always took him with her. Every Sunday after Mass, she rode the underground to the Botanic Gardens to sit inside the sticky, humid Kibble Palace and stare at the ferns and marble statues, paying no attention to what Marcus and Paul did in the meantime. Most Sundays, they wandered to the fish pond near the entrance to watch the goldfish. Dare to catch one? Paul challenged. Then his hands slipped into the shallow water, searching until they found the slick, squirming body of a fish. It wriggled in his grip, gasping, snapping its toothless mouth at his fingers. He felt a nervous jolt as he held on, then a strange, flooding sense of power as the fish began to still. Scared? He teased. Throw it back before Mom sees us, Marcus whispered, and Paul almost did. Then he had a better idea. He'd ambush Billy Curran and throw the fish in his face. He could already picture the flinch, the disgust, the flash of rage once Billy realized he'd been hit with an orange fish. It had to be in front of his friends. That was the only way it would count. Then they'd be even. So as has been highlighted in this chapter, there was also some tensions that started in Glasgow, not just because the population grew, but because they brought different stories with them. So there's something that still sometimes mars the city to this day, and that's sectarianism. You can see it with the Glasgow versus Rangers. It's like a football rivalry, but it's a bit more than that, because as everyone who's from Glasgow will know, that Rangers is associated with Protestantism, and Celtic is associated with Irish republicanism. And during this time, this sort of rivalry started, and it did fuel violent gang fights, often in the Glasgow Green. There's lots of literature from this era. For example, No Mean City, which is about gangs in the Gorbals. So this is highlighted by this chapter, and it does lead to a much larger argument in the book than just a fish. However, there wasn't just division. There was also a way that people managed to cross this divide through ways that were sometimes not approved by their parents or society. And so it happens that Paul's daughter in 1933 happens to start a romance that is not well liked by her father, would he find out. And this is what the next chapter is about. May danced. The radios at Watt Brothers on Sucky Hall Street were rarely silent, and as soon as Louis Armstrong or Lady of Spain came on and the customers had left, there was no stopping her. May liked working at the department store. She had been there since she was 16, advising the wealthy clients in the fashion department on the latest outfits inspired by Greta Garbo and Jean Harlow. Figure-hugging white dresses, black satin opera gloves, a long cigarette from which she exhaled smoke with practiced allure. That's how May Dougal saw herself in her dreams. She imagined her name in shining lights outside the King's Theatre or the Bowerland Ballroom, where she went whenever she had saved up enough. But as long as she stood behind the counter at Watt Brothers, she remained nothing more than Miss Mora Dougal, not even allowed to go by her nickname, May. It was Michael Millbrook, head of the electronics department, who caught her dancing and singing to I Found $1 Million Baby one evening after she had lowered the grill at the entrance. Only moments before the song ended, she turned and saw him. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, smiling and applauding. I didn't mean to disturb you, he said. I'm sorry, sir, May replied quickly. That wasn't professional. Michael glanced at his watch. If I understood correctly, business is finished for the day. No reason to stay professional. May I? He held out his hand and took the lead, his other hand resting lightly on her waist. May felt a curious tingling sensation. At the dance hall, it was different, but here, at work, with a colleague, it was inappropriate. Yet, it felt right. There's a swing band playing at the Barrowland tomorrow, he said, provided you like to dance outside the store as well. They met in secret whenever May was sure her friends wouldn't be out. Always in the city centre, far from the Gorbals. During her shifts, she looked for excuses to visit the electronics department, and sometimes they stayed late together, slipping away to the attic storeroom for quiet moments alone. But there was more than workplace or gossip to worry about. Michael was a Protestant. Her father would never allow such a union. And yet, the longer they saw each other, the more certain she became. This was the man she loved. And she wouldn't let anything stand in their way. On a warm summer morning, she left her parents' single end in the Gorbals for the last time, carrying an unusually large duffel bag. All day, she and Michael tried not to give anything away, tried not to think about the lives they had packed into 2 bags and stashed in the attic, waiting for them to head to the station after work and catch the train to Gretna Green, that border town famous since the Middle Ages for quick and simple marriages. From there, they would go on to London, far enough away from this city. So Glasgow wasn't just a working class town. It also provided lots of entertainment, as it already shown in the pictures, in this chapter. There still are famous places like the Barrowlands. There's lots of theaters, lots of venues that play music, and it is this propensity for music, for art, that would later help reinvent the city, because the shipbuilding was in decline ever since the war ended, and deindustrialization took place. And so the flats, like the Gorbals, they were not deemed appropriate for people to live in anymore, and they were torn down in the 1960s and often replaced with housing schemes outside of the town, as seen in this photo, like the Red Road Flats in Springburn in the northeast of Glasgow, but also the so-called New Gorbals, which are high-rise housing estates in the place where the old Gorbals were, and is still visible even to this day when going on the subway, because it stops in a lot of places in the south side of Glasgow, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, where you would wonder why they built a subway in a place that no one lives at. But the reason is there used to be lots of people living there. In fact, it was very, very densely populated, but those neighborhoods have just disappeared. They were basically relocated outside of town in these large housing schemes, but that brought a whole lot of issues with it, because the old social structures, like people's communities, people's churches, the schools, even the local butcher or the local supermarket, they were all no longer there. People didn't have this sort of communal safety net anymore. And these high-rise buildings often proved very alien and very cramped. So that brought a different type of level of deprivation with it, although they were considered progressive at the time. So the ancestors of the people in the beginning of the book, and the granddaughter of May that I just wrote this chapter about, finds herself growing up in the Red Road Flats, and her outlook on life and her life chances have become fairly different compared to those in the generations before her, because jobs in the industry have become much less common. But there's something new that has popped up, and that's the capital of Europe, or basically the cultural aspect of the city. So this next and last chapter that I'm going to read focuses on a character who was born in the year that Glasgow became a cultural capital of Europe, and that put an entirely new focus on arts and entertainment and this creative energy that sleeps under this historic and industrial heritage that Glasgow brings with it, and that encompasses the spirit of resilience and reinvention that fascinates me about the city so much. So this is set in 2008. Linda's daughter had disappeared. Leslie had drifted out of her life in countless quiet steps, and for the longest time, it had all seemed so full of promise. Linda had been relieved when Leslie stopped sneaking out to parties and hanging around with her friends from the flats. She had grown quieter, that much Linda had noticed. She sensed something was weighing on her daughter, and yet she also felt that, whatever it was, Leslie wasn't ready to share it. She spent hours practicing her guitar and, as Linda proudly told her, kept getting better, both in her singing and her playing. Even when, at 15, she brought home her first boyfriend, a scrawny nerd named Sean, they mostly stayed in her room, which she'd converted into a makeshift recording studio, mixing tracks on a second-hand laptop and soundboard they had scraped together. They played at parties, in community centers, and on the street, constantly forming new bands. Linda was glad her daughter had found a passion, a way to express her feelings in something healthy. And she wasn't neglecting school either. She was the first in the family to attend college. Her departure came in quiet increments. She had a new boyfriend who lived in a flat share in the city center. The time spent on the road with her band grew longer, with fewer breaks in between. Leslie shared photos of club gigs and festival sets on social media. And Linda began to wonder, when did she even find time to study? "I don't have time for that right now," Leslie said as she slung a duffel bag over her shoulder. "What is that supposed to mean?" Linda had gripped her arm. Leslie hesitated. "Roger Wellington, A&R at Imagine Records, came up to my show at the King Tut's last week. He offered me a contract. They want me to come to London and record an album. Wellington knows them all, Oasis, Arctic Monkeys. Mom, this is huge." She placed a CD on the table, one of the self-recorded albums she sold at shows and sent to record labels. The cover showed a row of washed-out concrete towers, the Red Road flats rising in the background. In the foreground stood Leslie, not a little girl anymore, but a young woman. Her name was printed above in bold capital letters. Linda wanted to scold her, to scream at her, to shake her for all her naivety, because she, of all people, had been the one who might finally escape the pull of poverty, trauma, and hopelessness that had gripped their family for generations. And now she was throwing it all away, in youthful arrogance and a belief in her own invincibility, for a dream too big to come true. Linda wanted to warn her about the charlatans in the music industry, about what could happen when fame did come and rob those who sought it of their safety, their peace, their well-being. But then she saw the light in her daughter's eyes, the same light she had once known herself, the kind of lightness you only feel when you're young and the world hasn't had time to break you yet. So she said nothing, and held her daughter in an embrace filled with love and endless sorrow. So that's me with the reading for now.